This is Myla. Myla is 3 years old. And one of the reasons for Kupuna, like myself, to have a 3-year-old, we call it, they call it today early childhood learning. Yesterday was just a living culture for us to care for the youngers and making sure that they hear our chants, they see our emotions, and feel the uhane or the spirit within our culture. For Hone Hone, the youngers will always love the kupuna. Say bye, Myla, aloha, aweo.
Good morning again and welcome back. We're going to get started with a message from our sponsors. Thank you. Unfortunately, pollution is a growing problem for our oceans. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about noise pollution, and this morning we're going to look at plastic pollution. And there's a really frightening statistic that right now there's about 1 pound of plastic for every 3 pounds of fish in our ocean. It's a growing problem, and it's a problem we really need to take action to address, both for the health of the oceans, but there's also a very strong connection to human health in this situation as well. I'm really happy to have Emily Woglum, who's the Executive Vice President of the Ocean Conservancy, here with us to lead the next panel discussion about what we can do locally and nationally to address oceans plastics. So with that, Emily?
Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Chris for running another wonderful Capitol Hill Oceans Week this year, and for including the issue of ocean plastic. For the ocean people in the audience, you know that one of the key benefits of working in the ocean field is that you get to go to some of the best travel locations. Florida Keys, Hawaii, Bali, Alaska, being on research boats, being on the beach, being with sea turtles. I started working on the issue of marine debris a couple of years ago at Ocean Conservancy, and ever since then I still go to amazing places like Bali and Cebu, Philippines, and Belize, but increasingly instead of scuba gear and bathing suits, I find myself in rubber boots and latex gloves, wandering around the local dump or municipal recycling center. So if, like me, you've wandered into this session and you're like, wait a second, we're here at Capitol Hill Oceans Week, why are we talking about waste management and recycling? You're not alone. But in fact, this is a continuation of a session that started, a topic that started last year talking about marine debris. And in last year's session, we identified that marine debris, and particularly plastic in the ocean, is a really significant problem. We have over 8 million metric tons of plastic going into the ocean every year. That's about one city dump truck dumping plastic into the ocean every minute. And from that, we learned that we can't just rely on picking it up off the beach or scooping it out of the ocean, that we have to figure out how to turn off the tap, how to make sure that plastic doesn't get into the ocean in the first place. And that leads us to solutions around reducing waste in the first place and better managing the waste that we do create. Those are two really important keys to the eventual solution. And finally, one of the key takeaways from last year's session was that these efforts to turn off the tap and to reduce and better manage waste require work across multiple sectors: governments, industry, and nonprofits. And so we're here today with some representatives from those different sectors to talk about some of the current initiatives and partnerships that are already underway to prevent marine debris and to figure out what those partnerships might help us understand about what's needed for solutions as we go forward. So with that as sort of background around the session, let me introduce our discussants today. First of all, we have Charlie Schwartz, who is the Global Sustainability Manager for Amcor Rigid Plastics. Charlie is the driver behind their sustainability initiatives in manufacturing operations, product development, marketing, and government affairs and innovation. He also has a board position on the National Association of PET Container Resources, NAPCOR, and the Recycling Partnership. Which is convenient because next to him is Keith Harrison, who is the CEO of the Recycling Partnership, a national nonprofit transforming recycling in towns across America. She has spent the last 19 years working on waste reduction and recycling, but she actually has a secret past working on ocean issues and was a research assistant focusing on nesting green and loggerhead sea turtle populations in Costa Rica and the coast of North Carolina. Welcome, Keith. Next to her is Susan Robinson, who is the Senior Public Affairs Director at Waste Management. She has over 30 years of experience in the industry, including work in the public sector with the City of Seattle, work in the nonprofit sector for the Washington Environmental Council, working in consultancy, and over 25 years in the private sector. She has wide-ranging experience from global commodity marketing and research to looking at industry trends, as well as managing municipal solid waste and recycling. She's currently responsible for Waste Management's public policy efforts, particularly focusing on recycling, management of organics, natural gas, and new technologies. So thank you all for being here. So with that, I thought, since this conversation is really about sort of what are some of the partnerships and initiatives that are happening right now to bring people together around solutions, maybe we would start with that as a question. Could you talk a little bit about some of the partnerships and initiatives that you're engaged in that are aimed at better managing or reducing waste and with a hopeful eventual outcome of reducing marine debris? Maybe we'll start on the end. Susan, do you want to start?
Sure. So I always think as a service provider in North America and mostly in North America, Canada, and the United States, our key partnerships are really with our customers, which are municipalities who set policy and who are responsible really at that local level for managing waste within their communities. So we work really closely with our municipal partners as well as with our business, our commercial customers as well. It's interesting about that, though, as the waste stream becomes more complex, really we recognize that we're part of this much more complex value chain, supply chain. And so we do, over the last probably decade or so, have understood the need to work with trade associations where members of the Recycling Partnership work very actively and rely on the great work that the Recycling Partnership does. We work with a lot of organizations who work with companies like Charlie's company, Amcor, to make sure that we have a two-way dialogue around how we manage, what can we manage for recycling, what can we not manage for recycling, how to design material so that it can be recycled, and then to be thinking about what we can do to make sure that we're all reducing our environmental impact along that entire value chain, from the production through the use of the materials, all the way through that end of life, which is really the role that we play, and why when I think about this topic, and we think a lot about plastics and the impact that it has when it does hit the marine environment. The role we really play so often is making sure we're working with all our partners and our communities to know how to manage all the materials right in the first place, whether it's recycling or whether it's disposal. Getting them in the right place is really important. So we kind of have to take that bigger picture. We have the infrastructure in the United States. We're very, very lucky to have that infrastructure, but we need to optimize it. And part of that optimization of our existing infrastructure is helping to educate people through this collaboration of partnerships so folks know how to manage their waste in the proper way.
Great. Keith?
So partnership's in our name. It's core to what we do. How many of you are out there like, recycling? Are we seriously still talking about recycling? Didn't we fix? Yeah, thank you for raising your hand. You even look bored with it, which I can understand. But the fact of the matter is, our research from last year shows that only half of Americans can recycle at home as easily as they can throw something away. So where they might have curbside pickup of their trash, they might have to drive their recycling. How does that affect participation rates? How does that affect the ability to get that important, valuable plastic back into the supply chain? We've got a problem in the US and in the globe, and it's too big of a problem for one group to do alone, so we do it in collaboration. Why still work in the world of recycling? It's all about climate action for me. It's about a healthy planet of keeping material moving so that we're not constantly disrupting the crust of the earth to get more material out. And that can't be done alone. It has to be done with businesses, with government, with other initiatives. And more importantly, for our organization, it has to be done with others. So I was very happy to join Ocean Conservancy last October in Japan, talking about how nonprofits can support developing infrastructure in other economies. I'm very happy to be part of a collaboration with World Wildlife Fund. So I feel like our job in the world of recycling is to help people understand that it's not done yet. We've got a lot of gains that we could make immediately for climate health, and that we're better off doing that in partnership with groups working on healthy communities, healthy water, and climate action.
Great, thank you. Charlie, as you talk about some of the partnerships you're involved in, do you want to start with explaining to people what part of the value chain Amcor actually sits in?
I was going to mention that because probably nobody in here has heard of Amcor, and if you have, bravo. So Amcor is what we call a converter in the plastics world. So we make plastic packaging, and we're the largest publicly traded plastics packaging company in the world. We make around, at least in North and South America, around 40 billion units a year. And we sell to some of the largest consumer goods companies, and we work in partnership because we have to. And we look at what the job of packaging really is, and what our job in the value chain is we optimize to deliver the product. And we do that really well, and we optimize per our customers' specifications to get that product on the shelf to the customer in the format that they want it. I think as we look at why partnerships are necessary, it's because of some of the unfortunate byproducts of what happens to that packaging and other plastics. And I'll try to reframe a little bit. When you look at plastics, packaging is about 30% of the packaging, the plastics that we see manufactured in the world. So we partner because our sphere of influence and expertise is built around that optimization of packaging. We partner with the Recycling Partnership because we see that that is an area, at least in the US, where we can start to optimize an already pretty well built up recycling infrastructure. We're partnering with the Ocean Conservancy and Trash Free Seas because we see a large growth opportunity in Asia, but we also see some really potential pitfalls there with a lack of a very robust waste management infrastructure. Several other partnerships, when we look at designing for recyclability, that's very important in the US. I work in our rigid plastics division, so we have a fairly low recycling rate for the packages that we make right now. And we want to make sure that we're designing the packages to work and get back into our packaging through the use of recycled materials. And also educating the general population on why it's important to get those materials back, whether it's for jobs, the environment, or just educating on the importance of environmental stewardship. We're also partnering with our flexibles division. So when you think of flexible packaging, think of things like candy wrappers or chip bags. We're working with several organizations to work on increased recyclability of those packages so that we can actually get those into that circular economy mindset. And also then working with building that robust waste infrastructure to be able to handle those materials. But for us, partnership is probably the most important thing that we can do to ensure that the systems issues that we have, most of which we can't directly influence internally, are actually addressed.
Great, thank you. There are a couple of issues that you all highlighted there, from the need for infrastructure, consumer education, a lot of the challenges that we have here in the U.S. In implementing recycling and making sure that we're recovering materials and managing them appropriately. But we know, and this ties to a question from the audience, so thank you. If you have other questions, please continue to send them up here. Given how much progress, or how much work we still have to do in the U.S., or where we are, no question, one of the largest waste generators in the world, it's also interesting to think about the fact that because we do have at least the basic infrastructure in place, the majority of ocean plastic that's in the ocean actually isn't coming from the US, even though we produce most of the waste in the world. That over half of the plastic in the ocean comes from rapidly developing economies, particularly in Asia right now, where what we understand is that as these economies are growing, people's ability to consume and therefore produce waste is increasing, and the investments in waste management infrastructure isn't keeping pace. And so right now that's happening particularly, we see that particularly where we have large populations and developing economies in Asia, but we expect to see the same thing in Africa and Latin America as those economies develop. There's a lot of focus here in this conversation on the US. So can we talk a little bit about what is the responsibility of companies and organizations and those of us here in the US to think about addressing marine debris and waste management on a global scale? How are the things that we're working on here in the US applicable and can help us with that global challenge?
Well, it's a global economy and it's a global environment. Although we focus on the US, we're working on packaging that comes from other countries and goes out of the country for processing or recycling somewhere else. And the same is true for marine debris. If the senator was here with us right now, he'd be talking about that's why he has his bill. That's why Alaska is interested in marine debris. It's not just about what they generate, it's about what they receive. It points to the need for like a rule against finger pointing, that this is a global problem and the U.S. has to be a part of it because we're the recipients of the problem just as much as we're creating material that can be the problem. That's why we are working hard to share data, resources, metrics, tools, even graphics with other countries, organizations that are working on this outside of the US landscape. But we haven't solved it here yet, so we can't just look away from our own doors. And I actually just on Saturday, I took a call. I was in my office and answered the phone. You shouldn't do that. But and it was a guy from the U.S. Virgin Islands who is just trying to get something started there. That's part of us. They have no infrastructure. Where is it going? It's going into the Great Away, and the Great Away is very often the ocean.
That's good, and that's, I think, a segue for waste management. We are a service provider, environmental services, and we provide services to our customers. So they hire us to be the solution. They hire us to not be part of the problem. So a lot of what we've done from a stewardship perspective, really in all the places we operate, is first of all, let's make sure that we are operating equipment in a way that doesn't contribute to the problem. A local problem becomes a global problem. And so we need to make sure we're not contributing to the local problem, that our infrastructure, our own systems are working well, and that we're making sure that we're always improving and making sure that we're doing a good job. And what's interesting about that is we then can take that knowledge and our expertise, and we actually have a consultancy group within the company. And they've done some work in Asia, they've done work in the Far East, they've done work on various island nations, really helping to transfer that knowledge that we have and that we know here to really help give ideas and support efforts in other countries. I was reading, it's an International Waste Management Association document, I believe it was, and they had this really great linkage between successful cities, clean cities, and good governance. And I think we see that where we are, and I think if you go to other communities across the globe, you'll see that. And that's part of this dialogue, how important it is that we kind of have all the pieces of that puzzle together to make for strong, healthy communities. Part of that is clean communities and the governance that drives to that.
Yeah, and I think as you translate what's happening in the U.S. on the global scale, and I'm starting to feel a little bit of the weight of the entire plastics industry and the consumer packaged goods industry on my shoulders. But brands are not just U.S. Brands are global. So when you see, and I'll share a story. We sponsor an expedition with the Earthwatch international organization, and we focus on coastal cleanups and actually gathering data. And I think that's one of the most important things we can do beyond just gaining awareness with things like coastal cleanups is starting to gather really good data so we know what's actually in the oceans, on the beaches. We actually were in the Whitsunday Islands, one of the most beautiful places in the world, north of Brisbane in Australia, and we found a bottle that was made by one of our facilities in Fairfield, California. And it was a global brand. I won't share the brand name, but that really brought it home to us that, like the climate, I think it's even a little bit more prescient that this is a global scale problem. There are risks that are borne by a lot of them US-based companies. And I think we're starting to see the need for expansion beyond our borders on things like product stewardship. And that's one of the main reasons that we joined the Trash Free Seas program, was to look at what are the ways that we can start to advance that waste management infrastructure in places like Asia, where we see the top 5 emitters, so to speak, of plastic pollution in the ocean. And I think we shouldn't really pat ourselves on the back too much in the U.S. because we're still number 20 on that list.
Yep.
So we still have a lot of work here to do. But it is a big risk issue for companies, and we're starting to take that on, but not every company is at the table. So I'd make the call out to any consumer products goods companies or other manufacturers to start looking at where the risks are and start addressing them.
Just real quick on that, if you were in the education session yesterday, I came in early enough to be able to sit through the second half of yesterday. It was just fascinating, but I thought one of the key things, one of the takeaways from the communication sessions is it's not just that you dislike something on Twitter, that you actually have to do something. But Twitter can be a vehicle for you to tell brands and companies what you expect and need from them to drive that engagement, because they do respond. They do respond to what their consumers want for your engagement with their material. So.
Thank you. A couple of points I just want to echo. I think the point about it being global economies and the opportunity for U.S. consumers to sort of express their demand for solutions and appreciation and support for companies and governments that support the solutions is really key. As Charlie mentioned, we at Ocean Conservancy convene the Trash Free Seas Alliance, where we work with Amcor and other partners to advance solutions across sectors of conservation, science, and industry. We also have been working on marine debris for 30 years as the convener of the International Coastal Cleanup. And one of the things that I take heart in is that waste management and waste issues have been an issue for a really long time. This is not new. We're the new ones to this party. There are a lot of great people who've been working on this, but one of the benefits is that the love and appreciation for the ocean is bringing a lot of renewed energy and interest and global policy dialogues and industry partners, because it's something that people and consumers connect to and care about, and are really concerned about the impact. So I feel like we've gotten a lift to working on a difficult and challenge that's been around for a long time, and it's because people love the ocean. And with that, I want to sort of segue to the next question. Problems can be challenging. We've heard a lot about governance and recycling and consumer education. Can't we just have technology solve this? Can't we just innovate our way out of this? I want easy solutions. So where are we? Is technology going to solve this for us? Can we expect to innovate our way out of this? Is there a future where this just isn't a problem, either because we've figured out how to better manage waste or recycle things, or we've just innovated on design and don't have waste in the first place? So give me some easy solutions. What do you got?
I think Keith and I can probably fight out who's going to answer this one first, because
I think you won.
Thanks. I get about a phone call a week asking for, hey, how do I add this degradable material into my bottle and just make it go away? How do I make this ocean degradable? And we, like I said in the first part, we design our packaging to first and foremost meet the needs of the customer and meet the needs of the consumer. And I've looked at a lot of materials, and my teams who are, well, I won't call them my teams, our teams who are much smarter than me on material science have not found that magic material yet that just makes things go away. And I think the other part of that is when you look at some of the technological advances, at least on the material side, you have to weigh in what is the effect on other systems that you're trying to optimize. And in the US case, we're trying to optimize, at least with our packaging, the recycling side of things. So if you add one material in that optimizes for, say, a degradability, and a lot of the ones that we've seen just make things smaller, quicker, they don't necessarily make things biodegrade completely, you may be hamstringing your recycling infrastructure as well. So we have to be very careful on how we look at materials. I'd say the greatest technological advancements right now that we've seen are some of the ones on the waste management and recycling side, looking at things like chemical recycling potentially, and things that deal with harder to recover materials like flexibles, and that's where we're very interested.
Yeah, the degradables additive question is the same one that I get. You know, there's litter problems. Litter runs into the ocean. Can't we put something in it that makes it go away? It doesn't go away, it gets very small. And what happens to very small things in the ocean? They can get consumed just the same. So we've just created very small, but much bigger problem. And, you know, and then the next question is, well, can't we scoop it out and recycle it? And there are some very finite examples of where beach plastic can go into, wasn't it a pair of underwear? Is that right? Richard Branson's wearing, yeah?
Shoes.
Bathing suit. Okay, bathing suit. I too saw a bathing suit. You know, there are these really finite things that they can go into, but that is not a solution. That is raising awareness. You know, Adidas is doing some good work of putting ocean debris into shoes, but that is not the solution. The solution is preventing it from getting there in the first place, and that technology is called infrastructure. And that is the silver bullet that is ginormous, right? So even in the US, we don't have enough infrastructure, or we don't have enough it's not capacity, we don't have the programs in place to get all that we can. Other countries have even less than we do, but the technology is really putting the opportunity in place so that it happens. Like, what we remind our recycling coordinators, we work with hundreds and hundreds of recycling programs across the country. You're not trying to get people to think about recycling all the time. You're trying to get them to recycle without having to think about it. And that's the same as litter and debris. And you're creating value for material, and you're putting it right in front of them so that they don't think about that they don't always have to think about their responsibility, that it just is second nature. And you know, I think this question is about technology, and I think the next question will probably be about, you know, consumer advocacy. They're connected in that we can't just teach the children, we can't just drive home this environmental message that we have to do it or else. Because many people just physically can't. So, and we can't just call for a new technology to scoop it out of the ocean because it still got there in the first place. So I think we get back to the system, and the technology we need is a better system.
So in terms of the system and infrastructure, well, that sounds expensive. So let's just make money from all the trash and just innovate on the other end, and just, what about chemical recycling? What about turning all the plastic we collect back into plastic and doing that?
I'm so glad you asked. Thank you so much. So not all technologies are the same. And so over the last decade, we've invested over $500 billion in R&D around technologies for end of life. What can we do with this stuff to make it into valuable products? And in order to do that, it has to work. The technology has to work, first of all. Second, it has to be cost effective. And third, you have to make it scalable. So just because it works in a small lab setting doesn't mean, a lot of folks who develop technologies don't really understand the complexity. Waste, garbage is really complex. And so it's really hard to scale it up to a large scale. So we really haven't found that silver bullet at the end of the scale either. The one thing, though, I have to point out that I think we've learned over a really hard decade and a lot of money spent is there are a lot of incremental technologies that we've got. We don't maybe have to only look at the one silver bullet. And I'm just going to give one simple example. There's something called a big belly solar garbage compactor. And In a community near me, this city is on a lake, and the lake drains into Puget Sound, lake drains into the Pacific Ocean. They made the decision to try these compacting garbage cans along the lakefront because they have hundreds of thousands of people who use it in the summer, and they were having a problem with litter overflowing in the cans and ultimately ending up in the lake. These are contained, they compact, and most importantly, they have a sensor. So when they're full, they send a message to a facility to come, they can come pick it up and empty it. So right there, you have one small bit of technology that does make a difference in that prevention to prevent a local problem from becoming a much bigger problem.
Okay.
But you mentioned the investment of processing, but I just want to flag for people that the material still has to get to there.
Right.
Like it still has to get there. So there's all this interesting stuff about plastics to oil or chemical recovery, and it's really super interesting as long as you can get it to there. And that takes an understanding of, why does recycling exist? Is it to save the landfills? No, in reality, recycling exists to build feedstock for manufacturing. That recycled plastic has to compete with virgin plastic on price and on quality, on reliability, if it's going to get put into the marketplace to be a bottle or carpet or jacket. And that means the price point at which it has to compete with virgin is what dictates how much technology can go into getting it there. And that's where, if we talk about this big hairy beast of infrastructure and system solution, it's all driven by the market economy. And once you realize that, then you can understand how you can drive more of that, because the positive outcome of that is the environmental gain.
Complex systems require complex solutions. And garbage is local, it's individual, it's messy because it's around people, and it just requires it's a complex issue that has a lot of complexities linked together.
We've heard about the need for collection, we've heard about the role of economics and thinking about sort of what the end markets are for collected material. We've heard that biodegradability and degradability is, I think, still an interesting area of research, as is some of the end-of-life treatment technologies, but that we're not quite there yet, and they're not as simple as we would all like them to be. Okay, so I'm still looking for an easy solution, and this ties to a question that I'm sure many people in the audience are asking right now, and that has been submitted. Why are we making this stuff? If it's so difficult to deal with, I think there was a study by TrueCost that estimated the natural capital costs of plastic packaging to be nearly $140 billion. Why don't we just stop making it?
So I'll take that one. Thanks, plastic guy. So again, why do we exist? What purpose are we serving by making packaging and by making plastics? It's to deliver, at least in the packaging side, again, 30% of plastics is to deliver a product to meet a need. Those needs for us are medical products. Those needs for us that we supply for are food, beverage, and a host of others that have, are necessities for the most part. And that's why we're making it. It's the most efficient system currently in the infrastructure and system that we've designed to be able to deliver that product safely and to the customer in the format it's needed. I think when you reference the TrueCost study, there are alternatives to everything. The TrueCost study did say that, on the whole, it was $140 billion of environmental impact for plastics across the board. The study also looked at the purpose of that study was to look at what is the next best alternative, and if we replaced all that plastic with metal, paperboard, other materials, glass, that actual environmental impact would go up due to increased logistics, costs on the environment, increased waste into the infrastructure, and other environmental costs. So that was somewhere on the order of, if you replaced everything, it'd be $540 billion, or in that ballpark. So it's not as simple, and we've talked about how systems interact with each other. You also have to think about what problem are you trying to solve. I think everybody who's here is concerned about getting plastics out of the ocean, but there's also kind of a 800-pound gorilla of climate in the room as well, which has a direct impact on the ocean when you're talking about ocean acidification and warming oceans. So from that perspective, you really have to leverage or think about which problem you're trying to solve and optimize your solutions based on those problems.
Yeah, so I started off with turtles, right? Not only did I do sea turtles, I also worked with Clemens Muhlenberg as a bog turtle in the Appalachian Range from North Carolina up to Pennsylvania. So I loved being in my waders in my bog and working on turtles. And it was very tangible. My mother understood what I did. My mother does not understand what I do now because recycling seems so simple. It's beguiling. It's so challenging because you're working with governments and industry. You're working with consumer intent. You're working with health safety. You're working with trying to teach people how when they send something away from them into the trash stream or the recycling stream, that it turns into something else. It's so confusing, and that's what really hooked me 19 years ago and took me out of biology and into this path of human ecology and natural resources, is because because there's hard change, there's hard work that needs to be done now. Recycling is not, I'm not a diehard recycler. Recycler is a means to a better environmental and economic end. And it can deliver those climate impacts, those ocean impacts today. And so when we're working on big system changes, like we need to have, like what we're talking about right now, we need to have the innovation for the future. How do we make a different future than today that is better? But we can't let the glory of that if or when distract us from the challenge of what we could achieve if we just changed it today with the sticky parameters we have right now. And so that's why I stay rooted in this really hard work of trying to change the world through recycling because of its broader impact. I'd say there's a balance, and I love the forward-thinking guys, and I want to do more with them so that we can work on today's stuff to match the future that they're building. So, Susan?
I guess the only thing I would add is kind of a continuum of this is as the stream has become more complex with so many different kinds of plastics, we have this shift in how we think about it, and it makes Keith's job that much harder, which is we have a lot of materials now that we can't recycle. So part of the education is around making sure that the materials that can't be recycled get to the right place too. And when we do that, we do look at the science and the data to say, this is better from an environmental perspective to not be recycled. It can't be recycled, but it still provides this valuable service in the environment from an overall life cycle impact. Using this plastic package actually uses less raw materials, less transportation costs, preserves the product that much better, which is where most of the life cycle impact is. So we look at all of those things too, and make sure that we're then trying to communicate to our customers, please, just because you want that to be recycled, Keith's terminology is wish cycling, please don't do that. That's not the right place for it. And then let's do recycle all those things that we do have and markets for.
Susan, do you have an example? Because this issue of life cycle impacts often feels like, we're just sort of avoiding the issue by pointing fingers in other directions. Is there a product or packaging or that you could give an example specific? I'm sort of thinking I heard one of the Oregon waste managers talk about sort of coffee.
Yeah, there's the coffee example that we use a lot. And there's also, actually, the one I like that I can't put numbers to, but I think it's even as easy to get your arms around is shipping. If you're using shipping of flexible, you get things in a Ziploc bag, right? When you often get a book or a shirt versus the cardboard box. When you do the life cycle assessment of whether the cardboard box is recyclable, and the flexible pouch is not recyclable because of the raw materials, the fewer raw materials that go into making that flexible pouch, even though you can't recycle it. And the cardboard box, even if you do recycle it, you're far better off using the flexible packaging. Less raw materials, less shipping, a much better overall environmental product. And the same with the coffee can example. You recycle a tin can over and over again. You can't recycle the flexible pouch we get coffee grounds in due to the raw materials and the energy use and the transportation costs. You're much better off using that flexible pouch than you are the recyclable materials.
I would throw up I didn't throw up, but this is where I get a little, this is where Susan and I are still working on how we see eye to eye, because there is this, there is a need of, there's a switch to everything being in pouches. Like, soup was always in a can, right? You think of, I'm gonna go to the store and buy soup. What is it in? it's in a can, but now when you go there, it's more often in pouches if you're still buying soup, and there's that shift. There's that shift in material, and that pouch has no recyclability. The steel can has recyclability because it has value. Should the pouch just get a free pass to the landfill or the ocean or the incinerator because it doesn't currently have value? Or should we find a way to infuse value in that material so that we can keep it in the cycle? That's really, the World Wildlife Fund just released a cascading materials vision that we signed on to, and we're partnering with them about thinking about this life cycle approach, thinking about material value, thinking about the system, and not just running a life cycle approach of a coffee can versus a coffee pouch or an air-sealed coffee pouch against each other, but trying to think about it more systematically. And I would say we're not there yet, but we can't allow it to be a scapegoat. I would add just one more thing of, I said earlier, why does recycling exist? It's to feed manufacturing, but how did it get started in the first place? It's because someone saw a pile of stuff and realized they could make money off of it. That was easier back in the days with metals. When more things were in metals, you could find the value out of that. Plastics recycling is a great example of, it started first with PET bottles and then milk jugs, but there's growing recyclability options for polypropylene, which is your yogurt container. So what they need is a like pile of stuff that a recycler can say, I can figure out how to make money off of that by selling it to turn into something else, for it to have that marketplace. So the challenge for us as a collective whole, as an industry, is how do we continue to make value for smarter technology packaging like pouches so that they don't just get a pass to disposal.
Thank you. And my reflection on that is that I think we also have a responsibility in the environmental sector and the NGO sector to sort of have a conversation across some of our own concerns, right? In that we have some groups who we're saying, like, pay attention to end of life, like stop letting it get into the ocean, stop making it in the first place, or redesign it so that it's so that it has less of an impact. Other groups are out there saying reduce carbon emissions. Other groups are out there saying I got to worry about the habitat and the land use that goes into making the piece of bread and making the coffee, and that on sort of assuming the best intent, that if at a minimum creates a really confusing landscape for industry to respond to, and if you have a more cynical view, right, it allows for the ability to say, well, I can't do your thing because that would make them mad, and I can't do their thing because it would make you mad, so I don't have to do anything, right? So I think getting some consistency across what is the goal and how do we optimize for the best environmental impact across the board, or at least be transparent about how we're making those trade-offs, I think is important. And I think the World Wildlife Fund cascading materials vision is a step to go in that direction. Ocean Conservancy signed on as well. Okay, we're still in the world of nuance and difficult solutions and multiple approaches. We have one more idea from the audience in terms of a simple solution: bioplastic. Let's instead of making plastic from oil and gas and petroleum products, let's make it out of, let's source it from plant material. Can I have this one?
You can have it. I get to go next.
Yes. All right, so this is another question that I get a lot, like, can't we just make it from a greener thing? So how do you make a PET bottle? Do you take a barrel of oil and squeeze it and out comes polyethylene terephthalate? No. PET is a chemical compound that can be made from oil, that is more often made from natural gas, or can also be made from plant-based material, like the Coca-Cola plant bottle. There's a lot of confusion of, is that different? They've just used a different source to create a chemical compound to make a PET container that fits into the normal recycling world, that delivers the product safety that Charlie talked about, that delivers Coca-Cola's expectations of what a bottle should be, and then fits into the recycling world. So it's a different way of going about chemistry. And you can source, this gets to your point exactly, Erin, of like, what's the biggest thing that I can do? And it's why we all go through phases of feeling despondent of, can I do it or not? Am I optimistic or pessimistic? I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. And I feel like that's how we get things done. So making materials out of a greener, plant-based is not always greener. It can be, But it doesn't always, it's not the silver bullet to a solution if it erodes end of life or if it actually takes more, creates more greenhouse gas in the production. So if the question is, should we be looking at bio-based alternatives if they provide a better environmental solution, then the answer is yes. There's lots of people working on that, and we can't do it in silos. They have to be through partnerships. And I want to hear what Charlie says.
I think bio-based materials are really interesting. I think there's a good future for them long term. But I think we have to kind of anchor ourselves in what problems, again, we're trying to solve. You touched on the climate side of things, and not all bio-based are equal as far as whether or not they have a lower carbon footprint. But at the end of the day, the majority of the plastics that you create, whether they be from petrochemical sources or bio-based sources, if they make their way into the ocean, they're not going away.
Yeah.
So just because we make something from a bio-based source doesn't mean that it's going to help out ocean marine debris issues. There's a roadmap there. I think we haven't run out of petroleum yet. And if you look at the actual carbon footprint numbers of most of those materials, they're marginally better than petrochemical sources right now. So I don't want to get blinded by the light of bioplastics right now and divert not this conversation, but divert the larger conversation away from some of the solutions that can actually really develop some of those infrastructure needs that we have in the US and other places.
Great. Thank you. That was a helpful answer to that question. So we're continuing to get some great questions from the audience. Thank you. Keep them coming. I'm going to filter a couple of them in here. One of the things, so we've heard about sort of needing, there's no silver bullet, needing an investment in a number of solutions from infrastructure to consumer behavior, both in terms of how to handle waste and also how to reduce waste and perhaps use less in the first place or use differently. We've heard about infrastructure. We've heard about technology. We started this conversation talking about partnership and cross-sector collaboration. I'd like to come back to that for a second. And as I mentioned before, Ocean Conservancy works in partnership with Charlie and others, and perhaps in future, some of our other panel members would like to join us in the Trash Free Seas Alliance. And that's been incredibly impactful and important for us to make new, to have increased impact and to find new approaches to addressing this problem. I'm curious for you all, because I hear from a lot of folks, other NGOs, other government agencies, multilateral groups saying, like, we want to work with industry, or we want to work with other partners, we want to work with people from different sectors. There's a lot of great opportunity there. There's also some challenges. Do you guys have any thoughts on, from your own experiences, what's sort of the key to making that successful, or what are some of the challenges that one has to look out for in order to do that successfully?
I think for waste management, it is a great question because our business model's changed so much over the last 20 years. And as it's done that, we've realized that we need a different set of folks to work with. Recycling is such a complex value chain that we really hadn't had visibility into for years and years and years. And now we've realized we need to be part of a bigger voice and a bigger dialogue there. So what's interesting about that, we work with NGOs, we work with trade organizations, we work directly with companies, and we often work with organizations that maybe on one issue we're on different sides of the table on versus an issue around recycling we might be sitting on the same side of the table on. So I think the most important thing that we have to do is kind of take our own company hat off and set it to the side and be thinking at a level higher and looking at how we can work together on a specific topic in order to achieve the goals that we're looking for. And I guess I'd say as an example, I think the last 5 years we've had some really rough seas in the recycling industry. And we really weren't sure, we realized we couldn't do it on our own. And so we started working collaboratively with a lot of different entities. And it was really hard at first. I'll say a lot of folks within the company weren't really thrilled about working with competitors or organizations that maybe we've been not worked collaboratively with before, but we realized that we all would win. We would win when we all would win. And so it really did, I think, open the door for us to work on harmonizing messaging, on on, making sure that we were all understanding what the issues were and working together, supporting the recycling partnership, ensuring that we really are working towards a common goal.
Yeah, so we were formed 3 years ago to serve this public-private partnership that had not existed in the world of recycling. That there had been lots of messaging going out that recycling is good, but no one was really working on the ground to make change. And our model was designed by government and industry at the same time. And over the past 3 years, it's proved that it's working. We've put $27 million worth of new infrastructure on the ground, 400,000 new carts, 3 state collaborations, 250 cities. We've got tons of metrics. We've also grown from 6 funding partners to 30, and there's more on the way, and there's a lot of competitors in the room, but they haven't fought. They believe in our mission, they like our results, and it allows these competitive interests to come together and focus their need towards a better future. And that is so reassuring for me. And I would like to go back and tell my 19-year-old self who was trying to figure out if she should stay in Turtles that this is good work to do, because we need an outlet for industry and government to come together and make change. Now what is even more heartening to me is now all our members want to see us doing more with others. That last year they gave me the green light and thumbs up to work with groups like Ocean Conservancy, to work in healthy communities, climate and water, so that we can help be a conduit for them to help leverage. What's hard is if everyone goes to industry with a different issue, and then it becomes a competing force for interest and dollars, when we're all trying to get a better global system. So I think that it's really, I want to impress upon you that I feel heartened by the sense of collaboration and drive from our industry partners. It feels authentic and real to me. We just need more, and your voice to them to collaborate more, and then voice to NGOs and nonprofits like us to do more together is powerful.
Yeah, I think as an industry collaborator, what Keith said, there are competing interests, but I think you have to have aligned interest. And with the recycling partnership, all of those partners there want to see a better recovery infrastructure in the US. With Trash-Free Seas, we want to see a better recovery infrastructure in places like Asia. We're members of the New Plastics Economy with Ellen MacArthur. We want to see a better, more circular plastics industry. But in order to align those interests, we have to realize that we are providing a product that is needed. The current economy is geared to use it, and we need to optimize it. And if we want to partner, I think you have to have those aligned interests to be able to move forward together. And I think the last thing is, when we formed the recycling partnership, when Keith and then some of the partners did, we knew that a rising tide had to lift those boats. And there's a lot of capital that is required to work on the projects that the Ocean Conservancy is working on, and what the recycling partnership is doing as well. But we need more members at the table, and there are a lot more members that have aligned interests. We just don't have all of them there yet.
Yeah, I'm heartened to see how much interest from industry has grown over the past couple of years, partly due to efforts like this, where in terms of raising the profile of the issue and the need for action. I want to add my own sort of answers to that little question based on our work with the Trash-Free Seas Alliance. When people talk to me about we want to work with industry, my first question to them is sort of, do you really? Not just like there's, we need multiple approaches to the problem of trash. We need multiple groups working from multiple different perspectives in the NGO field. And some of us need to be working with industry, and there's an important role that others play in sort of really standing on the outside and pushing hard and working with consumers and really sort of being a force about accountability. So I think people need to figure out which side of that line they want to be on, and both of those roles are important and are needed. The second thing that I sort of reflected on in our work with the Trash-Free Seas Alliance is to remember that if you're going to work with industry or with other sectors, everybody's got an agenda. And the key is to figure out where those agendas overlap and to focus on the things you can agree on. And so for me, the most important thing is I want to know what your agenda is. I need you to be, if you're going to be a partner with me, I need you to be transparent about it, right? Not Amcor does not come to the table. Maybe Charlie loves sea turtles. I'm there because I love sea turtles. Maybe Charlie loves sea turtles, but Amcor is not at the Trash Receives Alliance with us because they love sea turtles. They are there because they have a problem they need to solve for their business interest. Okay, now that I understand that that's what's your agenda, we can figure out where there's room to overlap. There may or may not be, but that sort of transparency about what your motivations are, for me, is sort of a key principle that we need to understand.
I would like to totally echo on that. Like, even in the world of recycling, you would think that everyone would just have the same interests. No. And that's where we start with, is we're a mission-driven nonprofit, and we're going to get things done, but I need to know what you want out of this, what metric you want out of this, so I can give you that one. But everyone's going to want something different, and I think that's what actually keeps them at the table, is being able to deliver, but to serve an interest through data. And so I really am glad that you said that. I think that's something that we all have to, that's a great realist thing that we need in order to build this thing.
Great.
I think just to add on that as well, I think businesses are starting to see that alignment is much more crucial than it has been in the past. And we're starting to see that because, I'll say the other 800-pound gorilla word, the word bans that are happening around the world. And if you saw UN Oceans Week last week, that was actually one of the bullet points that came out was ending the use of single-use plastics. So again, I think that's a very blunt approach, which could have other consequences that could make the system non-optimized. And that's why businesses are starting to come together to bridge those areas of alignment and start to work together to try to solve some of these wicked problems, to use the systems parlance, that we can only do together. But you didn't see that 10, 15 years ago. This is starting to only happen in the last 5 years.
I've been extremely impressed in our business, the complete different way that we look at recycling and the different connectivity that we have. For example, I think you mentioned Design for Recyclability. There are organizations, the American Plastics, Association of Plastic Recyclers and Sustainable Packaging Coalition. They work to ensure that we can communicate what we can handle, whether it's at a facility in terms of size, shape, glues, inks, whatever, to help design for that. And then we understand the material that's coming at it from us too. So those organizations did not, whether they existed, they certainly didn't communicate, talk to one another. And it's I would say in the last 10 years, a completely different way of doing businesses that creates those linkages along the way so that we do have a better chance of taking something that maybe isn't recyclable today, understanding that we need it to be, and working towards getting it, finding a way to have that material go from the waste stream to the recycling stream.
Great. So we are in the last 5 minutes. I'm going to try and summarize what we've heard and pose one last question to you all. You did not give me a single silver bullet easy solution, so F for all of you. But what we did hear is that this is a bit of a wicked problem, that it requires action from across different sectors and across different priorities. We talked a little bit about infrastructure, making sure that people have a collection system to put items into in the first place, and that they are then treated responsibly, making sure that consumers and individuals are educated not just about using those systems, but also about what their options are in terms of reducing or refusing or reusing to reduce the amount of waste they're producing in the first place. We've talked about collaborations and technologies to redesign materials, to redesign technologies, to redesign systems. And I'm getting a lot of questions from the audience in terms of, okay, but which one? Where should we focus? Should we focus on recycling, or does that just make people feel better about what they're doing? Should we be focusing on refusing or reducing? Should it be the industry that focuses on that? Should we be focusing on consumers? Should it be the government's responsibility? Shouldn't we just choose to reduce our consumption overall? So a lot of desire to sort of prioritize, right? So recognizing that it takes multiple actors from multiple positions, working in different angles and lots of different approaches. How do we prioritize a little bit? So I won't make you pick one, but if you had to pick 2 or 3, where do you feel most hopeful about prioritizing action to actually get to solutions? And she says 1 minute, my watch says 2, so.
So I think we're sitting in DC, and I really wish Senator Sullivan was here to talk about this as well. But I think that is part of the challenge for the federal government as well, is to continue to fund things like sustainable materials management through the EPA, because we need, if you look at me, you're going to get one answer. If you look at another industry player, you're going to get another answer. We need some guidance there across and from the federal government. And sustainable materials management from the EPA is one program that is really driving that. And I think, and I know that is one way that we can actually get some one-way guidance that would help us out with that.
It's also targeted in the budget cuts.
Yes.
I liked what was said earlier about top-down, bottom-up at the same time. I think that's exactly what we're working on, is trying to influence elected officials in their decision-making while we're building the solution from the bottom up. From my point of view, obviously, what I do every day is try to build a comprehensive U.S. recovery system so that people can recycle without having to think about it, while in the background working with industry groups on what is the best material to use, how do we design for recyclability, should we be designing for disposal because that's better for the world? We're actively in those industry discussions, and I think I think that's where we'll continue our focus, and I look forward to doing that more with other industry groups, as I said, through broader collaboration.
I think quickly I'll go back to the sustainable materials management, which really looks at the materials that we're managing all the way along to see where we can prioritize the kind of best environmental bang for the buck, I guess you'd say. And we have to start somewhere, and prevention is so important, looking upstream to reduce the environmental impacts of the materials and the products that we use. And I layer that with education, and I just keep, over my career, I am struck by how many times we've tried to solve a problem through technology or innovation, and at the end of the day, you have to have behavior change, and we have to have the individuals taking pride, taking action, staying engaged, and engaging in those behaviors in order to achieve the right environmental outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I would just add, from our perspective, the Trash Receipts Alliance, we're really focused on how we plug industry in the most effective way in terms of using their resource and expertise to solve some of these problems. Thank you so much for being here. I am really, as I said, heartened by the fact that people's love for the ocean has inspired so much attention and engagement around this historical problem of waste. I think we've heard a couple comments about how much energy and advancement and additional groups and attention and new solutions are coming to the table just within the last 5 years. It is a complex, nuanced, challenging problem. There is no silver bullet and easy answer, but this is one area where I feel optimistic that we can solve this. Every piece of plastic that ends up in the ocean was at some point in someone's hands. That means people can solve this problem. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to Chao for continuing to focus on this issue, and for all of you for participating.
Thank you. Emily, thank you so much for a great summary, and I really want to thank all of our panelists for their presentations. You showed the complexity of the issue and looking at it both from the ocean perspective and what's going on in the supply chain, so I thought it was a great panel. We'll see everybody back here at 1:30 for the Ridge to Reef panel, and have a great lunch. Thank you.